Charlottesville is a diverse town in Virginia, southwest of Washington. The students at the public high school there speak 46 different languages, thanks in large part to the considerable refugee population there. So what's happening? The white supremacists marching in Charlottesville said they want to take America back. Take it back from whom and for what purpose? The left and right occasionally convey a similar message. What is it about America that makes some people want to seize it from other people? Meanwhile, President Donald Trump's reaction, or the lack of it, became a major story in its own right. Events in Charlottesville are the big story tonight on Gravitas. I'm Sana Khan. Here are the headlines. Signs of easing in tension on the Korean peninsula. Kim Jong-un delays a decision on firing missiles towards Guam while he wants to see what the United States does next, according to North Korean media reports. As the verbal sparring between the United States and North Korea takes a less bellicose tone, China says that the North Korean nuclear crisis has reached a turning point and it is time for peace talks. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani issues a direct threat to the Trump administration, claims Tehran is capable of restarting its nuclear program within hours and quickly bringing it to even more advanced levels than in 2015. US President Donald Trump faces backlash over handling of Charlottesville upheaval. 3 members of an advisory council led by the chief executive of Merck, Kenneth Frazier, have quit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addresses the nation on Independence Day, outlines vision and sets a deadline for 2022 for building a new India that he says is free of caste and religious differences, corruption and terrorism, and where all Indians have access to housing, electricity and water. And former Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif files 3 separate appeals in the Supreme Court to review the Panama Gate verdict that resulted in his disqualification, argues that July 28th decision should have been given by a 3-member bench. And later on Gravitas, Iran's president has warned that it could restart its nuclear program within hours if the US imposed any more sanctions. And as the tensions continue between Washington and Pyongyang, some positive signs. North Korean state radio announces that President Kim Jong-un wants to hold off the launching of the missiles at Guam. And the iconic Big Ben is set to go silent for 4 long years. The massive restoration project is set to cost a whopping £29 million. But first up, the big story. President Trump has condemned the violence of white supremacist groups in Charlottesville, a city southwest of Washington, D.C. His critics say it was too little, too late. And the exit of several leading CEOs from a presidential panel underscored the lack of moral leadership from Trump. Here's a roundup of what's going on.
Racism is evil. And those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans.
Fine words by America's president, but the critics say they should have come earlier. In fact, Trump had equated the violence by white supremacists with that of others. He came out later only after being urged by his top advisors to do so.
As a candidate, I promise to restore law and order to our country, and our federal law enforcement agencies are following through on that pledge. We will spare no resource in fighting so that every American child can grow up free from violence and fear.
By then, it appeared the damage had been done. Under Armour CEO Kevin Plank and Intel chief Brian Krzanich quit the American Manufacturing Council, a presidential panel. The AFL-CIO Labour Federation, representing more than 12 million workers, indicated it may also pull out. Perhaps most damaging was Kenneth Frazier, the African-American head of Pharma Major Merck, who also quit. Trump's response typically was a tweet that said nothing about the reasons for Frazier's departure, instead saying it would give Frazier more time to lower rip-off drug prices, a reference to allegations that the pharma industry's products tended to be overpriced. Frazier's departure was all the more damaging as he was the only African American on the council. But the departure of others showed an increasing tendency on the part of American CEOs to provide moral leadership, which they clearly believe is lacking in the present incumbent of the White House. Bureau Report, WION.
Well, let's talk about this. Joining me from Oakland, California is international affairs expert Stephen Golub. Joe Inderies, a journalist from America Politics. He joins me live from Jacksonville. And Brian Balogh is the Dorothy Danforth Compton Professor at the Miller Center and Professor of History at the University of Virginia. He joins me live from Charlottesville, where everything, in fact, unfolded this weekend. Let me start by asking you, Brian Balogh, you're at the center of it all. What's the mood like right now?
Well, the mood is pretty somber, as you might expect. But a lot of people here in Charlottesville have renewed their commitment to ensuring that the democratic process is restored to our town and to our country.
All right, Stephen Golub, coming to you now. Let's get the facts straight. It is a fact, a group of very racist people, they came together in Charlottesville, which is a very historically racist campus, and did some racist things. I mean, what's going on? Why hasn't the president sent out a clear message?
Well, just briefly, even though the University of Virginia, which is where which is located in Charlottesville, does have a history of racism, in recent years it's been much more moderate, much more progressive, and in all sorts of ways. President Trump hasn't sent out a positive message because President Trump has leading people in the White House, footsteps away from his Oval Office, who are, if not white supremacists themselves, are very sympathetic to these folks. President Trump views these people as part of his base and doesn't want to alienate them. This is a president who will send out harsh tweets against a CEO, against the Pope, against anyone he doesn't like. He's been very restrained, however, in sending out tweets against, not just tweets, making statements against these neo-Nazis. They're explicitly neo-Nazis. They use the Nazi salute. They many of them carry Nazi flags with them. So he views these people as part of his base. He doesn't want to alienate them. And this is a very, very disturbing development in terms of, I agree with what Professor Balogh said. There are some good things that could come out of it in terms of pro-democratic forces raising their heads more and being more assertive. But the basic story is that we have something like we've never seen in my lifetime before, in my adult lifetime at least, people with military weapons marching through the streets of a peaceful American town with Nazi flags by the hundreds, evoking images of Nazi Germany through their nighttime parade with torches, and at the same time we have a president who, in his statements, has paid lip service finally after lots of public pressure to coming out against white racism, but really that's clearly not been in his heart about where he's coming from regarding this.
Right, Joe Inderies, you know, what's happening over here? Look at Merck CEO's resignation. I mean, a prominent black corporate executive, the stature of Kenneth Frazier, he's quit, you know, in his, that's his idea of protest at this point. That's all that he could do. He's quit. He says it's a matter of personal conscience. I felt a responsibility to take a stand. Is this a sign of things to come, perhaps many more Charlottesville-like accidents? Because the president has, you know, he's failed to give out a clear message. And no matter if he comes back and says something again, but he's lost that opportunity, don't you feel?
Right. You only get one chance to make a first impression, right? And I think that, you know, the die is certainly cast. The Trump supporters will say that no matter what he says from now on, the left, the people who don't like the president, will, you know, say it's not enough, it's too little, too late. Even if it's actually true that it is too little too late. They're going to be on the side of, hey, he took care of it. Yeah, he was a little bit late to the party, but let's celebrate the fact that he got there anyway. That's the one side. In terms of, Mr. Fraser's resignation from this board, he's certainly not alone. And I think now, I think I saw this morning that the gentleman who represented Intel is now leaving the board as well. And what's really interesting about these boards is that they seem to be, kind of figureheads, photo opportunities for the president to say, look, I'm doing something, we've got a seat at the table, but the people at the table aren't really doing anything. So the guys that are there, I think, are kind of thinking that it's a kind of a waste of time anyway. And so if they can distance themselves from this sort of controversy, they certainly took the first exit ramp to be able to do so. As to your question as to whether or not we're going to see more of these sorts of activities from these racist organizations, I think yes. I think yes. And we've got one potentially coming to Gainesville, Florida, at the University of Florida, where Richard Spencer has requested to rent a room at the university in order to speak to the students there. And as of now, the university has not said no, because he filled out the proper application. So we will see. We will certainly see what happens. I think that the interesting point here is, and I'm interested to hear what the rest of your panel has to say about sort of the coverage of this and bringing these things, these ideas that have been in the corners of American life for centuries, out into the light where they can be properly disinfected and eventually die. Right? We had this fight in 1865. We had this fight in 1945. The right, the righteous, won it both times.
I get your point, Joe. In fact, let me take this to Professor Balogh. Professor, what do you think? Do you agree with what Joe here has to say? More worrying is perhaps the possibility that it does not end in Charlottesville.
Oh, I couldn't agree more that it's not going to end in Charlottesville, which is not to say it's not going to continue in Charlottesville. It will. But I think we're going to be looking at this at college campuses and liberal enclaves throughout the United States. I do think that if those who care about legitimate free speech continue to fight back, and if the authorities use their power to suppress thuggish techniques and carrying weapons to intimidate people, I think the vast majority of Americans are going to side with in the case of Charlottesville, counter-protesters who are protesting neo-Nazis, the Ku Klux Klan, and other fascist groups walking through their streets. What all of your guests have agreed upon is how unnerving it is to see people who supposedly are exercising their right of free speech carrying semi-automatic weapons, in essence, machine guns, carrying baseball bats, carrying brass knuckles. Those are not needed for free speech.
Right. I get your point. Stephen Golub, would you agree with what's being said here on the panel? It seems clearer now. It's not just rhetoric anymore. The threat seems real for Americans.
Oh, yes, definitely. It's unprecedented. And, frankly, just to put this in the context of your own society, what these people who feel that they have President Trump's support, with good reason, because he's been so restrained in criticizing them, they've made that clear through their public statements and through their websites. They feel President Trump supports them. And again, as I said, he's got top support, top people, officials in his White House who are sympathetic to these folks. What this means for India and the rest of the world is that some people in the U.S. feel that people of Indian ancestry don't belong in the U.S. They may even feel that they're superior to people from India and other countries. I want to make sure to emphasize that this is a minority in our society, perhaps even a small minority, but they're significant, and unfortunately there will be more challenges such as this in the days and weeks and months to come.
Right. Joe, coming back to you over there. Now, the fact is that President Trump Americans expected a sort of a statement from their president, which didn't, of course, come through in the first time. And then there were cover-ups. There was Mike Pence jumping in, Ivanka Trump tweeting about it. There was Jeff Sessions' statement. There were a host of statements to try and, cover up for what President Trump didn't actually say. How much that is going to now linger on, in the minds of people? There is no explanation really as to why the president didn't address that fact head on the first chance that he got.
Well, there is an explanation. The fact of the matter is, when you have a guy like Steve Bannon, who is in the upper echelons of the administration, whose website, Breitbart, was designed and explicitly said in its mission statement to give voice to the quote-unquote alt-right. Let's call that what it is. That is a white nationalist, white supremacist mindset and ideology. When you have that guy with an office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, that is an explanation for why we saw the tepid response on Saturday. Okay, so I think that it will linger. It will absolutely continue to linger for him, because it does set that expectation against all of the other things that he came out so strongly against that were, so much less than this. When Nordstrom dropped Ivanka's line, bang, it was a fierce response from the president.
Right.
And when you have someone who died, right, a woman who died in this, and then 2 law enforcement officers who were in the helicopter who died.
That's right.
And the response was lukewarm in the eyes of many. I think that's gonna stay. And we always keep saying, what's going to eventually be the tipping point, right? Eventually there is a straw that breaks the camel's back here. His core support, though, guys, is not going anywhere. That 30%, that's staying with him no matter what. And, so we'll see what comes next.
All right. Professor Balog, lack of moral clarity, do you see it as a case of that? What's needed? What will help?
Well, it obviously would help if President Trump had a moral compass and expressed it. I don't think that he does, and I think this incident proves that. So what will help is exactly what's happening, is leaders in politics from his own party speaking up about this, criticizing him. What will help is leaders in the private sector. Your news talked about these 3 CEOs who resigned from the Trump panel because of this. Leaders in the private sector speaking up, and regular Americans turning out and expressing their strong views that racism, anti-Semitism, anti-immigrant, white nativism is not acceptable in the United States. All of which is to say, putting these people or making them crawl back into the holes that they crawled out of in the first place, because they were empowered and given permission through something that we Americans called dog whistling, signals that humans can't hear but dogs can hear, through dog whistles, signaling that it's okay. And as your other guests have pointed out, adding to that, by putting advocates for white nationalism in some of the highest posts in the United States government.
All right, and Stephen Golub, what would you like to add to that? I mean, a lot of debates on Fox News, CNN. Some people are actually Republicans coming out in defense of President Trump, saying that he's all over the place, his hands are full. Look at what's happening with Russia, fighting the fake media. Look at how he's fighting the Democrats. That's no excuse, really.
No, it's no excuse at all, and I definitely agree with what's just been said. I think it is very unfortunate that some Republicans, in particular, are still defending him, making excuses for him. If there are some good things that have come out of this, one is that it is clear to many people in the society, many opinion leaders and Americans as a whole, that we can't turn to our president for moral leadership in ways that we used to be able to. Even though I didn't like President Bush in many ways, his policies, he was in some ways good in rallying the country after our 9/11 tragic attack. Same thing for President Clinton or President Reagan going back far enough. We're used to presidents doing that. It's now clear we can't rely on President Trump to do that. And it is a good thing that some Republicans, some conservatives are taking strong stands against him. It is a good thing that his popularity ratings continue to drop. He's now at 34% in the latest Gallup poll, a major poll.
Right.
You might wonder why 34% still support him, but still that's 34% as opposed to 61% opposed to him. And it's a good thing that many people are peacefully taking various steps to try to counter this very, very frightening trend in our society.
All right, Joe, thanks for waiting there patiently. I know you wanted to come in. You want to add to that?
Right. Yeah, in terms of the American presidency and moral leadership, when in the past there have been presidencies that have lost their footing at the beginning, and I think about where Bill Clinton was when we had the Oklahoma City bombing, right? And he seized that opportunity, that tragedy. He got the mood of the nation at that point, and he jumped on that, and it really turned his presidency around. Right? He was very empathetic in that moment and very strong in terms of his moral leadership. You mentioned President Bush the younger, right? W. Bush after 9/11. Then on the flip side of that, you had his response to Katrina, right? Which, and Good Job Brownie and those images of him over the flood damage that stuck with him forever. It stained his presidency and made him look completely out of touch with what was happening in the ground. And so whether this sticks with President Trump or not, I think remains to be seen. Every time we think in the media and the intelligentsia, the thought leaders that were just mentioned by your other guest, right? Every time we think that that's the final knockout punch, that he's not going to be able to recover from this, somehow he redirects, diverts, tweets out something crazy, and we forget about it.
Right.
So until it's over, it's not over.
Right. In fact, you mentioned about President Trump tweeting. Now, a very final question to all of my guests this evening: if there was a way that things could be taken back, or there was a chance for course correction in this case of Charlottesville for President Trump, if you guys were the U.S. president and you did what you did, making out that statement, and if you had to tweet out something in order to correct that or take your words back or make amends, what would it be? Professor Balog, let's start with you.
Well, if you're asking what he should have done originally, he should have issued the kind of clear, concise statement, angry, I might add. These are all things he's great at, and your guests have pointed this out. Clear, concise, angry statement that racism will not be tolerated and that organizations that promote it have no place in American society and definitely have no place among his supporters or in the Republican Party. He should have hearkened back to other Republicans who told racists previously in American history and not so long ago, like Bob Dole, to head for the exits, and Dole actually pointed to them where the exits are, because often they're not very smart.
All right, Stephen Golub, what would you say?
I think one thing he should come out with an announcement and an action firing his top strategist, Steve Bannon, who's allied with these these forces. Whether he's a white supremacist or not, we could debate, but has supported these forces in a lot of ways. He should fire the other top officials in the White House who are also aligned with them. And he should come out with a statement to these neo-Nazis, the Ku Klux Klan, the white supremacists, saying, I reject your support. I don't want you. Go crawl back into the hole you came out of, and I want to have nothing to do with you. You're not real Americans.
Right. At least we can expect him to fire people. He is becoming really good at that, the U.S. President. Joe Indores, very quickly, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, very quickly, because I know you're out of time. I'm just going to co-sign what the other two gentlemen said. And then perhaps, and I know it's not in a tweet, but he needs to develop an actual thesis, right, a theory that says that the Black Lives Matter movement, right, is not equal to the Unite the Right movement. One is against police brutality. The other believes in the genetic superiority of a race. These two things are not equivalent, and he needs to understand. And so when he says many sides, that's what he's referring to. And then you see on certain cable networks that repeated itself last night.
That's right.
He needs to.
In fact, so many things that the U.S. president could have done, but clearly he's failed to do that. We're still seeing the fallout of Charlottesville. Let's see where this takes us. Stephen Golub, Joe Indores, and Professor Balogh, thanks so much for joining me this evening on the show. All right, with that, we're going to take a very short break here on Gravitas. Be right back. Stay with us. Lots more news and updates follow.